take it that y'all rejected being in our office like sardines. I've always put everybody like sardines. It's the only, I can't control a damn thing about what y'all put on the air, but I can make it uncomfortable for you to be there. And that's
You treat us well, we'll treat you well. Not a promise.
I am reasonably certain that you lied your ass off right there. You will treat me however works best for you.
Thank you.
And if not, your boss needs a new you.
All right.
Don't say that. No. They've already been looking for one.
Yeah, mine is too. My wife back there would trade me right now for 2 boxes of donuts and a chiclet.
Who's gonna be doing most of the talking?
I'll do all of it.
You'll be doing it.
All right.
Yeah, if you're getting any kind of a sound level already, that's what you're gonna have.
Mic check, mic check. Can you hear me now? Mic check, mic check, mic check, mic.
For what it's worth, I heard you.
Hold on.
Your cable's a little.
All right. Should be okay now, Chris? Okay.
And for the most part, this will be responsive to questions.
What's up right now?
Whoever needed a cable, do they have one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mic check, mic check. Let's see. Mic check, testing, testing. Okay.
Is it better now?
Oh, it's good, yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. We have been engaged to represent Pete Arredondo in his prosecution in Uvalde, Texas. Pete was the chief of the school district police at the time of the mass murder. Unfortunately, he has now been criminally charged under a novel theory of criminality that only makes matters tragically worse than they would have been if his information had been used as an educational tool, if the authorities that were looking into this were using this situation to examine the protocols for police shootings, it'd be much more constructive than prosecuting somebody who did his dead level best at the time and did not fail the protocols. The protocols failed the situation. The protocols for this type of a thing seem to think that every event falls in one of 3 categories. It does acknowledge that they can morph back and forth, but in this particular instance, by the time that the first responders, of which Pete was a first responder, by the time the first responders were in the hallway, the shooting was over with. By the classic definitions, that would make it something other than an active shooter at that time. What happened was that the call went out And without thinking about his own personal safety, the chief got to the scene as fast as he could get to the scene, and he was one of the very first people into the school, in spite of the fact he didn't even have his protective vest on. He went in there to save as many lives as he could save. If they were in danger, he didn't even know if they were in danger. When he went in there, he saw the cloud of the gunpowder smoke. He was unable to determine where the shooter was when he first went in there. Shortly thereafter, he found him to be barricaded in a room. What he didn't know was whether or not there was anybody in that room. It was the last day of school, and they were having award ceremonies. Some kids were out of their room at award ceremonies, and he hoped that was the case here. What he did know is the room he checked was empty. The room that the shooter ended up being in was darkened. Couldn't see in. There was a door that is a fire door that opened only to the out. It couldn't be kicked in. It's reinforced. It couldn't be just battered. It required a special tool. Couldn't see in. There were shots that rang out through the wallboard showing Pete that the situation was such that if there was a gunfight, people all over the place were in the area where they could be hit by a stray bullet. There were classrooms right next to it. Kids still in it. That he knew. The order was to evacuate those kids. They had to figure out how to evacuate them. They ended up going out and breaking windows on the outside, evacuating the kids. Where the shooter was, he didn't know if he had a barricaded suspect. He didn't know if he had somebody that was holding hostages. What he did know is there was no active shooting at that time. And he went to work saving as many kids as he could save. Now, he is under his indictment. The claim is that he should have set up a command post because he was the designated person in the school policy to set up a command post. It's not that rigid. That's not how it works if you are on the scene as a first responder. Every single law enforcement officer that shows up is competent and trained to set up a command post. The people that are on the point, that are in the level of connectivity to where they're potentially in the gunfight, it's not their job to set up a command post. The protocols say that somebody outside of the door, outside of the fire zone, is the best person to. But everybody who responded is competent, trained, and eligible to set up a command post, and they didn't do it. That was not known to Pete. He believed if the command post had been set up behind him. It's unfathomable that that wasn't the case. Because of the lack of a command post, decisions were made with inadequate information over and over and over. Known to many people was the fact that there were children in that room. It was not made known to the people in that area until later. In fact, there's a little girl that called 911 and was talking about how there were downed students and how scared she was. The people inside did not learn about that until it was all over. In Pete's instance, he didn't know about that phone call for 3 days. The lack of the command post caused best guess decisions on inadequate information. That is not criminal. When a police officer makes their best possible decision based on the information they've got, it may or may not be right, but it's not criminal. And to charge this man under these circumstances is absolutely an outrage. He did everything that he could with the information he had to save as many lives as he could save, and potentially saved dozens of children by getting them out of the crossfire. And I want to point something out. 15 of the kids in that room did survive. How many would have survived if there had been a massive gunfight? They couldn't get in through the door without special equipment, and nobody had the special equipment. They couldn't stand in front of the door without rifle-rated shields, and it took a long time to get those there for whatever reason. During Pete's tenure as the chief, he had requested in writing over and over again more equipment, better radios, effective radios. The radios didn't even work inside that building, and it was known to all, and nobody did anything about it. I'm not suggesting for a second that this is an event that anybody in law enforcement should be proud of. But it's not criminal. And it's tragic to try to cleanse the situation on the backs of somebody who did his dead level best, as Pete Arredondo did. It's tragic to put the prosecution of 2 police officers ahead of a completely open, fact-finding investigation to improve protocols for next time. These protocols didn't work. They've got to be upgraded. These protocols came into effect because of previous school shootings. We don't have enough of those incidents to be able to have already perfect protocols. They didn't work that day because they need revision. They need flexibility. They need to be put together with more and comprehensive information. What happened here? The district attorney ordered everybody to keep their mouths shut. The only voice that was heard was DPS's voice. This information was restricted. Interviews were with people that were on point didn't happen for a prolonged period of time, if at all. Instead of collecting data, instead of figuring out how to take this tragedy and keep it from happening again, information was shut down instead of made readily and publicly available. That shouldn't happen for the good of your child or my child. It should never, well, I'm a little old for child, but I've got grandchildren. These kids have to have the safety of the best protocols we can put forward. When the incident happens, that's not the time to try and make your best decisions. You've got to have good training, good protocols, repetitious reinforcement of those protocols, because decisions are hard to make in that type of an environment. The most insulting thing that I have seen, the head of DPS Texas accused Pete Arredondo of placing the lives of peace officers ahead of the lives of children. Pete didn't even have on any vest, and he stood right there at the point ready to engage the shooter if he could find the shooter, if he could get to the shooter. He never, for 1 second, forgot that this was all about the kids. He saw these kids every single day. He knew them by name. He had a relative that died in those rooms. He didn't put his life or any other officer's lives ahead of the lives of the children. And that statement has to be challenged. It's shocking, it's wrong, and it's very counterproductive. What questions do you have?
I wanted to ask, you mentioned several times that the mass shooting was over by the time you arrived, but, obviously there's a guy in there with a gun.
Yeah.
And a bunch of kids, so what do you mean by that? Can you elaborate a little bit?
What I didn't say the mass shooting was over. What I said was the active shooter wasn't happening. Now, you've got a couple of other possibilities. You've got somebody with hostages, or you've got somebody that is in an area barricaded by themselves. But the active shooting had discontinued by the time he got into the building. The gun wasn't blasting at that time.
Does that end the second the last shot is fired, basically?
Yeah, it can go in and out. I mean, as it did here. Minutes later, there were a few shots that were fired. It went back to active shooting for a few moments. And that's the difficulty with these protocols. You can't pigeonhole whether or not you've got an active shooter, a barricaded suspect, or if you've got a hostage situation. You can't pigeonhole it because you can go in and out of one in a matter of a moment. I don't know what the protocols need to be. I don't suggest that I am any kind of an expert on this, but these protocols are too rigid and too different to work in a fluid situation where it's going back and forth between these categorized areas. And they didn't work. And that leaves officers just winging it to the best of their ability.
So you've been critical of DPS and the district attorney, but it's the grand jury made up of members of the public who came back with these indictments.
They did.
Are you saying the grand jury did not do its job?
I don't have yet the transcripts of what the grand jury was told.
But you know they came back with these indictments.
I do know that the grand jury did give an indictment.
So are
But
you saying they failed?
until I get, I'm happy to answer your question. Until I get the transcripts, I don't know what information they were operating off of. If they were fed crap, their decision is going to be based upon that. If they were fed a full story, and if they were fed a fair story, then I've got no complaint about any professional decision they make. But until I see those transcripts, I don't have a clue whether or not they had the kind of information that they deserve to have. I don't have a clue whether or not they had the kind of information they needed to be able to make an intelligent decision. I don't know till I see the transcripts, but I will get them, I will see them, and I will know.
How long have you been representing Mr. Arredondo, and what have you been able to see? Body cameras, 911, what have you had time to see?
The discovery is not ready for release yet. It soon will be. I haven't seen anything that you haven't seen.
And when did you start representing him?
Within the last month.
And active or non-active shooting aside, the indictment suggests that he knew there were injured children inside. Is that your understanding? And
Absolutely not. At first, he did not know where the shooter was. And after he determined which room the shooter was in, he had reason to believe that maybe there were no children in there, because the room that he was able to get to, they weren't there. And it was a neighboring room. And there were no cries, no shrieks, no light coming out of the room that he was in. Now, sometime later, many minutes later, he decided that there were probably children in there. But he wasn't finished clearing the other rooms that would be in the crossfire. So he had no knowledge, then he had some information giving rise to speculation, and finally he had knowledge of the existence of the children in that room.
And I guess, do you feel like he has any criminal responsibility for the children that were inside that room?
No. He had police officer responsibility. He made decisions based on what he had to work with. If he had more information, the decisions likely would have been different. Does he have responsibility for perhaps making a wrong choice? Maybe he does. Does he have criminal liability for that? Has he totally been an abject failure as a peace officer? Absolutely not. Decisions police officers make can be right, they can be wrong, but before they become criminal, they have to be without any basis for the decision, with an abject dereliction of duty. And that didn't happen here. I'm not defending every decision he makes. He doesn't defend every decision he made. What I am saying is that there is no theory under law where this man had criminal liability. Civil liability, maybe, maybe not. But criminal liability, no way.
You said some of the decisions he does not defend. What are those that he doesn't defend?
Well, the decision that the children might not be there, that's clearly, in hindsight, with better information, not the case. The decisions that he made were all based on that. That was his best judgment at the time. In hindsight, that's clearly not the case. But it's not like he decided, those kids are toast, we're saving ourselves. That never happened.
Why isn't he here? I mean, he's already done a national television interview.
Pete isn't here because Pete has to make a living. And he's working right now. He didn't have anything to add to this. At the interview you referenced, he was the object of the interview. At this one is where I can be talked to. But he's working right now, and he's broke. He lost his health insurance. He lost his pay. He was just a school cop. He couldn't afford to have this kind of thing happen to him at his age. Getting by has been a struggle, and he's still struggling to get by.
Why did you guys decide to go public?
That was on me. The information that was out there, that is out there, puts Pete in a position to where he looks like a cruel and evil man, which makes him have a large degree of difficulty even going to the supermarket. He lives in Uvalde. He's from Uvalde. The children that died, their families are still alive. And they have to know that there is not a complete story in what was put out there by DPS. They have to know that they need to be demanding that this be looked into deeper. They have to know that we're not using this precious set of data as a teaching moment so that their kids' tragedy can maybe prevent another school tragedy. They have, everybody in Uvalde has to know that Pete Arredondo didn't neglect his job, so that they can have a proper perspective. Help figure out what happened to their lives and why. As impacted as Pete has been, nobody is as impacted as the mom and dad of any one of those children. And those people have to know more information. And I am determined to get them what I can, when I can, as soon as I can.
On the note of the procedure, I know you mentioned the command post thing. Is that, to your understanding, the process that should have been followed from the get-go? You know, once they get that call, command post should have been established?
Absolutely. That is a no-brainer.
Okay. And why did Pete not do that? Because I know he
It-
ran in, but he doesn't have a vest, he's got a pistol, like what is, it seems like a failure of leadership to just rush in there under-equipped, right?
You have 2 or 3 questions wrapped into your question. I'm gonna try to take them all. He got there as quick as he could because there were kids there, and he's a peace officer first. He went in as deeply as he could get because he's a peace officer, and there were kids there, and that was his duty. All of the protocols for all of this stuff, they understand and they accept that sometimes the highest ranking person can't do the command post because they are on the point. Sometimes that happens. That's a given. And when that happens, the duty falls on the next person available. That's a no-brainer for all military actions, for all police actions. You know, we just saw an assassination attempt of a presidential candidate. We're hearing right now on a daily basis the failures of the command post of the system there. I don't think anybody's talking about prosecuting anybody, but they are talking about all of it so that they can learn and never do that again. Why did Pete not set up the command post? Because he didn't care whether or not he had a vest on or not. He wanted to protect those children. And he knew that every officer that was responding had training in setting up a command post, had the authority to set up the command post, and had the responsibility to set up the command post. And he just knew that that would surely happen and didn't know it hadn't until he came out. And for days later didn't realize how much information was collectively available that could have been funneled through a command post to the people like him that were on the point, that would have changed their decision-making process. The command post wasn't set up. We literally had hundreds of officers that had the responsibility for it that didn't do it. I don't think those people should be prosecuted. The situation has to be studied, it has to be worked with, and we have to get a handle on how to do these things. But should he have backed out of that hall? Not as a first responder. His duty is to stay right there. Until relieved, that's his duty, is to stay right there. He just happened to be faster at getting there than other people. It would have been far better if he had arrived 5 minutes later and he wasn't on the point, because he absolutely would have set up a command post. But he doesn't have any explanation for why it wasn't done. And each one of those officers that had that training, that had that responsibility, I don't think they can tell you why they didn't do it either. I'm not here trying to blame anybody, and I wish everybody would quit. I am trying to say this has to be better developed in terms of protocols. This has to be better put together so that there's more of an automatic nature. Apparently there wasn't enough training in this stuff because it didn't happen as second nature. A person who is riding a motorcycle for the first time has to think, okay, brake, clutch, feet. But if you've been riding for 40 years, all that's automatic. The training should be such that that sort of thing is automatic. And it's very apparent that it wasn't because it didn't happen.
What's next for your office moving forward in representing Mr. Arredondo?
Well, I've got a lot of people that are going to do a lot of work. 3 of them are sitting up here with me. We've got to go through just a mountain of discovery. we have to make several different decisions. One of the decisions I have to make is whether or not to file for a change of venue in this case. Another decision that has to be made is how fast to push for an expedited trial, if at all. I am keenly aware of the desperate need for Uvalde in general and the family of these deceased children to have this not strung out for a prolonged period of time and to have it not done away from home. I'm keenly aware of that. I'm balancing all of that with my need to protect Pete Arredondo from a prosecution that should never be happening. It's overwhelming. What's next is a lot of decisions and a lot of sorting through one piece of paper after another piece of paper after another. And I don't even have them yet. But I will tell you that one of the things that's weighing on me very heavily, I want to look at this situation. I want to look at the law. I want to see if it's even legal to prosecute this man under these facts.
So, excuse me, was you operating under the world of assumption, assuming that somebody else had set up a command post? You never stopped for a moment and said to his second in command or some other branch of law enforcement, has anyone set up a command post yet? I mean,
What you're asking is whether or not he verified that there was a command post behind him. Is that essentially what you're asking?
just if he had some knowledge or was reaching out, whether it was behind him or in front of him or
Well-
before he entered the building?
No, he did not. And is that a failure? Maybe in some manner it is. But remember, he's not there as a chief. In that particular instance, he's there as a first responder. The duties of supervising that situation fall behind him in that instance. But no, he did not say, did everybody back there do their job?
We'll just set up.
He believed that they did.
So to clarify, the indictment calls him the incident commander. You'll be arguing against that he was the incident commander?
Absolutely. It completely ignores the rest of the protocols. The only thing that we have that they can lean on for him being an incident commander is the school shooter policy that says he will be the incident commander. Every part of his positioning and activity that day are not that of an incident commander. And the school district protocols, they don't articulate the exceptions, but everybody knows them. And they're in the training. And when you are in the hot zone, you are not an incident commander.
Even if you're the police chief?
Absolutely. I mean, if the chief of police happens to be the person that stumbles into a 7-Eleven during a robbery, he's not a police chief at that time, he's a police officer. And if there's something to be decided or done, it has to be decided or done by somebody who's out of the hot zone.
There's a pre-trial hearing scheduled for mid-September. Do you expect that to happen?
There's not really a hearing, that's just kind of, we have to label it as something. The lawyers and the judges get together and say, is there anything that anybody needs, that they need judicial intervention to make it happen? There's not going to be any testimony, there's not going to be any witnesses. There may not even be a need for a setting. It would be more appropriate to call that a setting than to call it a hearing.
And will you keep Arredondo out of court, or he'll participate in these early things, so just be attorneys?
Well, when Pete's needed, he'll be there. But, you know, the defendant has precious little to do with being protected at this stage of a process. That's on us.
And your expectation is that this will go all the way to trial and ultimately make it into the hands of the jury?
I would like to get it kicked out as being an illegal prosecution of a police officer under these facts and circumstances without a jury trial. And I hope I can do that. But if I don't, I wouldn't plead this guy to jaywalking under these circumstances. Yes, it'll go to trial. If they don't dismiss it, if the judge doesn't declare that it's an illegal prosecution, yes, it'll go to trial. Going once,
You mentioned that he's working. Are you able to share anything about what he's been doing?
selling barbecue. That's all he can do. And he's making the best living he can make with it. Going once, twice, and 3 times, and we're done.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everybody.
Are we doing this in Spanish at all? No?
No. Because we don't know Spanish. The only Spanish I know is uno más por amor. Or in the alternative, bring the dinero to the abogado. But that's it for me.
I don't even wanna know where you learned that.
Love, guys.
Thank you.
Oh,
From left.
would you introduce
So
everyone?
Clay Conrad. Follow the name.
My bad, I didn't introduce anybody, including
Anyone.
you.
Anyone.